Abbiamo in linea il prossimo ospite di oggi. Questo è uno degli italo-aborigeni di cui vi ho parlato, Chris Sarra, lato Loreto Romeo, con cui parliamo più tardi. E Chris a Brisbane, ci raggiunge da Brisbane, è stato nel passato Queenslander of the Year e anche NAIDOC, National Person of Interest. I think that's correct. So thank you, Chris. Magari poi gli parliamo un po', prima in inglese, un po' in italiano. Thank you, Chris, for joining us from Brisbane for this NAIDOC Week special.
That's my great pleasure, Antonia. Very nice to be with you.
Yes, so we have met once and we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation around that. And so your background, professional background, is in education. And you spent a lot of time on Aboriginal education in particular, right?
Correct, yes. My hometown is Bundaberg, and that's my mum's country. And my father is from Abruzzo, and he settled in Bundaberg with a lot of Italian friends and farmers, and so it was a very special mix, I think, to have an Aboriginal mother, Italian father, and I learned lots of great things from both of them.
Okay, we'll talk about that a bit later. That's when we'll try to do that in Italian. So when I mentioned to the guest I had just before, Anna Russo, I mentioned Chris Sarra. He said, "Oh, is he the education expert, the teacher, well known? So what are you well known for?"
Somebody must know me. So, as you say, I started my career in education in 1988. I started as a secondary physical education and secondary English teacher, and from there, I went on to do various other things. I probably became more well known to lots of people when I became the principal of Sherbrooke School. That was in 1998. Sherbrooke, for those of your listeners who don't know, is an Aboriginal community school. And in that time, uh, lots of Aboriginal schools were not performing very well. And it was true that we were lots too many of us as educators were simply tolerating that circumstance or explaining why that was the case. And so I arrived there as the school's first Aboriginal school principal, and I knew very well what it was like to be thought about in a low expectations way or subjected to low expectations. And I knew that if I embraced the children with high expectations, then they would rise to the challenge. And indeed they did. So I spent about 6 years at Sherbrooke, and we had many positive results. Literacy improved dramatically, numeracy improved dramatically, attendance went from 52 to 94%.
Yeah.
So it became better than the state average. So it was great success, and I think off the back of that success, we were able to go and work with other educators across Australia to help them.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, you talked about raising expectations and maybe supporting. Who needed more support? The children, the families? Because I know there's a strong family culture um, in the Indigenous nations.
Very much. I think probably the most important thing, Antonia, was the challenging of the teachers who were
Okay.
in the community. That was probably the most important thing because I was the principal. I had the sort of hierarchical power afforded me as in my role as principal. And so I could either accept their excuses or challenge them to lift their standards because effectively I was in control of the school. I determined what the school culture looked like. That the decision for that sat with me. And I think that was the benefit of coming from an Aboriginal background and knowing what it feels like to be subjected to that toxic stench of low expectations. That I knew that if we could seek to embrace the children with high expectations and embrace the parents with high expectations and say to them, we're not here to iron out their cultural identity. we want to strengthen their cultural identity. So that's what they were turning up for. And I did say to teachers, you know what, what I believe is that our children can be strong in their sense of cultural identity, and they can be smart enough to be at the same levels as other children from other schools in Brisbane, Townsville, Cairns, Adelaide, wherever. Children in year three should be working at a year three level
Yeah.
uh, in any of those other places, and so on. So that was the case, and I did say to them, look, if you don't believe that, then frankly, you shouldn't be here, because we were the ones who were paid to be in that relationship with those children, and we were in charge of how we presented to that relationship. Whether we came with low expectations and not expecting much of them, we were in charge of whether we chose to give them photocopied coloring in worksheets, or whether we chose to give them uh, learning experiences that was intellectually rich and stimulating and worth turning up for. That was probably the most important thing, to challenge them to believe in the children, because ultimately that's what we're paid to be there for. A school and a classroom should be that place where children are met by adults who let them believe and think and imagine all of the greatest things that they can, rather than turn up to a place where it's there's not much happening and people are saying, well, don't get too far ahead of yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things that we might pick up on at the moment. That word smart and strong. But I was going to ask you, so changing the attitudes of the teachers was important. Um, did that have an impact on content and material, pedagogical material that was presented to
It
the children?
yes, yeah, it certainly did, because it was when any children go to school, it's important to be able to see themselves um, and be embraced for all of who they are, you know. Um, our sense of cultural identity is not something that we just leave at the school gate and then pick up on the way home, you know, and that's just true for Italian migrant children, for African migrant children, Asian migrant children. We all have a human right to have all of who we are embraced. Now, there's a really interesting conversation going on about this ideas of monocultural versus multiculturalism. And I think people get stuck, or they create tension for themselves with this sort of mindset that we've all got to somehow be the same. Um, and it's an impossible dream, because one, it's too boring if everybody was the same. And two, it's just humanity is so complex that we can't be anything other than who we are. And so we owe it to each other to be curious about our differences, not try to, I should be curious and intrigued by your differences, and want to embrace them and learn about them and give them a valid place, and honor those differences, rather than try to iron them out and expect you to be like me. Um, so it's been interesting work, and yeah, I've enjoyed it very much, and more, you know, all along the while, I've been lucky because I had a very strong Aboriginal mother who taught me our ways and what it means to be Aboriginal and how precious that is, and I've been able to lean into that. But also, I had a very strong, hard-working Italian father who taught me about that strong work ethic, and it's just wonderful to be able to lean into that, my sense of being Italian as well, and embrace that. And so people will say, well, what are you? Are you Aboriginal, or are you Australian? And there'll be other crazy people who say, well, you got to forget about all those things and you're Australian. Well, do you know what? I can be all of those things. Our sense of identity is not just one of those things. It's all of those things and how they coexist in our own um, sense of existence. And at various times, depending on where we are and what's happening, I can lean into my sense of being Aboriginal and really love that. Does it mean that I've stopped being Italian? No. It's just that my sense of being Aboriginal is resonating most strongly, or more strongly than my sense of being Italian. But when I'm in Milianico, my father's village, back in Abruzzo, and I'm speaking Italian with um, um, my cousins and my brothers and those sorts of things, in that moment, in quel momento, siamo um, fratelli italiani. In quel momento, we are Italian in that moment. Does that mean I've stopped being Aboriginal? No, it just means that my sense of being Aboriginal is not resonating as strongly as my sense of being Italian. So I'm comfortable with that kind of understanding. I'm comfortable with being all of who I am.
All of
It's
those,
probably a
yes.
long-winded question, response to your question. I'm
No, no,
sorry.
no, but you brought
Mm,
together a lot of things that we just, well, I have only the Italian and the Australian birth, and we have these issues. Just with the two cultures, it becomes a bit more complex, but so we understand exactly the concepts. Now, I know you've written, we're talking about content, you've written some children's books, amongst other things that you've done.
mm, I
So
have, yeah,
what
dingoes
are
are
they
not
about?
dogs.
Hmm?
Well, there's a book I wrote well, a couple of years ago now called Dingoes Are Not Dogs. People can find it online. And it's kind of um, it kind of goes to the essence of what we just talked about in that um, we can be same and we can be different. And Dingoes Are Not Dogs is a story about a dog whose name is Winston, a Labrador, who comes upon a pack of dingoes, and they're playing and having great fun in the hot sun and swimming in the pool in the creek. Um, and they're a bit suspicious of each other because they look similar, but they're somewhat different. Um, but when they kind of get past that and get to know each other, they become really good friends and they learn about each other's differences. And I think the closing line is something like, um, in some ways they were same, and in some ways they were different, and that was great. In some ways they were same, and that was great too. But they all belong to the one pack or something like that, which is really a kind of a way, like even us as human beings, in some ways we're same, and that's great. In some ways we're different, and that's great too. But ultimately, we all belong to the one race, the
Yes, even.
human race.
Now, I mentioned those words strong and smart, because you've created an institute, the Stronger, Smarter Institute. So,
That's
which I think
correct.
you've probably already talked about the essence, the ethics of this program. What do you plan to do? What do you hope to do with this institute?
Well, the Institute's been around now, Antonia, for 21 years,
Mm.
and it's why I had set it up off the back of the success that we had at Sherbrooke School, because as I mentioned, at that time, there were pretty much no Aboriginal schools succeeding, and so it kind of made sense that if we had um, found some of the keys to success, then it would be a smart thing to share that with others. And so when we set it up 21 years ago, we had this lofty ambition of changing the tide of low expectations of Aboriginal children and Torres Strait Islander children right across Australia. And I think over time, when I reflect, I think we've done that. Australia today is quite different, and in the education profession, where the stronger, smarter approach is quite well known, I think we have challenged educators to lift their expectations. And, people understand that just because a child comes from a particular postcode or they might have a different cultural background, that doesn't predetermine their level of intellect or what they should get to choose who they become. And that we've got to be, as educators, we've got to be determined to unlock human potential in every child who sits in front of us. So I like to think that we've brought some sense of honor and get people to understand the strong and the smart. What I mean by that is when a child with a cultural difference comes to school, they must never have to choose between whether they should be culturally strong or academically smart or feel like they've got to surrender one to embrace the
Mhm.
other. Um, in reality, we operate from the belief that it is a human right to embrace both, to be strong and to be smart. And so been delivering leadership programs to help unlock that kind of human potential and understanding in school leaders, school principals, in teachers and community leaders, so that they can understand that part, so that they can in turn go and unlock that sort of human potential in the form of the children who sit in front of them.
Good. Well, it sounds like then your model approach has been either replicated or used as an inspiration to bring positive change into the education system in Queensland, at least. That's good. Now, the Italianness. So you already mentioned bits of your Italianness. You said a few words. You mentioned Emilianico. So in Abruzzo, that's where your father comes from, right?
Sì, è vero. My Italian's not so strong, but perhaps I can try to explain. Il mio padre ha una famiglia lui da Abruzzo, un village, il nome Miglianico,
Sì.
vicino Pescara. Prima eh, lui viene qui in Australia. eh, Lui ha fatto una famiglia, due femmine, due,
Due donne, due femmine, sì.
sì, e un figlio.
Mhm.
Uh, so io ho un fratello e due sorelle in Italia, più
In Italia.
vecchio di me. Sì,
Ah,
sì. E lui era. He had a wife, un moglie in Italia, prima un moglie e una famiglia lì, prima viene qui. Viene qui in 1952, dopo la guerra, come tante altre
sì.
italiane, per trovare lavoro. Forse eh, lui ha avuto, he had uh,
Claro,
a plan to return, ma, ma per cose non so, lui non ritorna, rimane qui e, e- e con mia madre loro hanno 10 figlie. Poi
wow,
sì,
wow.
sì, è vero. E io più giovane di tutti,
Ah,
eh, ho un fratello e due sorelle in Italia. Qui, i miei genitori qui, hanno fatto sei, boys, ragazzi
ragazzi,
e
e
quattro
quattro
ragazze.
femminucce, quattro femminucce.
Sì.
Ok, quindi
Sì,
allora,
sì, una famiglia grande e il mio padre è molto fertile come un
se,
toro.
allora, parli benino e io così abbiamo fatto senza preparazione. All'inizio ho detto facciamo un po' di italiano, quindi molto molto presumo che non parli molto italiano di solito. Come hai imparato? Dove hai imparato l'italiano?
Ah, quando ero giovane, i miei fratelli qui, lavoro con il nostro padre
Sì.
in Bundaberg,
Ah,
ehm, in tanti farms, come si dice farms?
farms, fattorie, sì, fattorie,
Fattorie,
bravo.
sì, sì. Um, and quando
Ci sono tanti
siamo.
italiani a Bundaberg.
Sì, 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 sì,
Ok.
sì. E cresce sugarcane,
Ah,
tobacco,
sì.
pomodori,
Eh,
watermelons, tante verdure. E quando siamo al lavoro così, sempre ascoltiamo italiano, ma
mhm.
non parlo. Solo imparato di parole brutte, eh, come tutti,
Come
no?
tutte, sì.
Sì, sì, ma mio padre morte lui era era giovane, troppo giovane,
troppo giovane.
66 anni, ma lui
Oh,
lavora sempre.
sì.
Quando finisce il lavoro, un anno dopo è morto
Mm.
perché fuma troppo,
Ah,
è morto di lung cancer.
lung cancer, yeah.
Ma eh, dopo lui morto, sono andato in Italia eh, to meet with,
Per
per fare
visitare
visitare il mio fratello e
le
sorelle e
sorelle.
cugini in Abruzzo e loro non parlano inglese. Allora, devo imparare italiano di più, ma dopo due, tre, quattro, forse cinque volte sono andato in Italia
Wow.
per visitare, ma sento se questa è una cosa importante
Mm.
per imparare a parlare con loro. Ehm, sì, per me è molto
Ah, sì,
speciale e
quindi
spero che, scusa,
spero che sì, è
spero che
importante per te per conoscere i tuoi fratelli, fratelli e le sorelle,
sì,
sì.
sì, 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 ma spero che io ho imparato più il mio italiano quando prima il mio padre è morto,
Sì.
perché se lui era qui, lui sono qui adesso, eh, forse lui diventare molto very proud.
Ah,
Eh,
orgoglioso, orgoglioso, bravo. Ok,
sì, sì, forse lui, per questa cosa, per parlare italiano con lui, un cosa molto speciale, ma adesso non è possibile.
hai detto sei stato 5 volte in
Sì,
Italia.
sì, sì, infatti l'anno scorso sono andato in Italia in Abruzzo per 5 settimane,
Oh, bello.
è andato solo io e mia moglie rimane qui.
Uh,
eh, è meglio così, ma meglio per me, ma ho detto meglio perché se tu vieni con me io parlo
parli
inglese.
inglese, inglese.
Sì. Questi viaggi mi piace fare eh, u- tre cose. Correre di Milianico Tour 18 km con mia sorella,
Ah, ok,
eh, lui migliorare il mio italiano
italiano.
e fare ricerca per la nostra famiglia in Milianico per quando ho scritto la prossima libro. Quando voglio scritto un altro libro e in quel libro vorrei mettere più di storia di
Sì.
nostro radice
Le
italiane.
radici italiane, sì. Allora, hai
Eh,
imparato l'italiano dal papà e la lingua o le lingue indigene di tua madre?
No, solo poche parole
Mm.
in lingue aborigine, eh, ma quella lingua è quando siamo giovani, ehm, mia madre non parla lingue aborigine perché lei ha, come tante persone aborigine, hanno fatto paura per
Sì,
parlare perché eh, non bene per parlare ehm, lingue aborigini per paura di
sì.
uomini
Che
viene
vi
e
portano
prende
via. Sì,
sì,
the stolen generation. We talked about
sì,
this with Auntie Irene Allen too. She was
sì,
lucky
è
she
vero.
wasn't taken away, but she saw some of her friends snatched and taken from their families. Yeah. Well, we've fascinating. We'll have to have some more conversations around this and your work. But so thank you again, Chris, Sarra, for coming on to Radio Italia in Adelaide, giving us your an overview of your story, your Italianness, your indigeneity.
Quando parliamo così e il tempo veloce e we must come back together. I would love that very much.
Molto presto. Ok, va bene, grazie. And have a good weekend, and we'll talk again. We'll talk again senz'altro.
Grazie mille.
Okay.
Ciao.